Hi from Lviv again. Yesterday I recorded just a very brief video from my home computer because I didn't have access to the studio. I was meaning to record a longer presentation with explaining things that happened over the weekend and over the past 2 days. So today I'm trying to catch up with my plans on updating you on the situation in Ukraine. And as always, I try to bring together visual representations with what I'm going to say. And this image, which I stumbled across on the internet, really impressed me, of a woman with a child hiding in probably in a shelter underground. It's unidentified image. I don't know where it was taken, but it's quite heartbreaking, I would say, especially if you look at the face of the child. So I will be speaking today about humanitarian situation in Ukraine, mostly. But before that, I want to just update you to make some highlights on what is going on generally in the country. As always, I will not be focusing on what mainstream media are usually covering very well, all the events and like military progress or regress, whatever is happening on the front lines. I will just briefly sketch some important things which I find important, and then offer some reflections on from the inside, so to speak, on what is going on and what are the consequences for our society and for the world. One of the key issues these days is if Belarus will join in this war. Obviously, Belarusian people don't matter here. Nobody asks the opinion polls or anything. It's up to the dictator of Belarus, Lukashenko, Alexander Lukashenko, who is under the foot of Putin these days, because he formally signed this treaty of kind of joint state with Russia, and now he is basically under the jurisdiction of Russian president. So he is being pressured into this war by Putin. Obviously, Belarusian army is quite weak. It never faced any real conflict before, and as rumors go, generals and all the top of the Belarusian military are very much reluctant to go to war with Ukraine, seeing what's going on with Russian army, but also because of numerous family ties between Belarusians and Ukrainians. It's often said that Ukrainians are brother people to Russians and Russians are brother people to Ukraine, which is obviously not true. Obviously, there are connections and there is proximity of languages to some extent and so on. But if we really speak about people who are the closest to Ukrainians, this would be probably Belarusians. And given their mentality, given the language, which is very transparent for Ukrainians and vice versa, and also incountable family ties between the two nations. So this will be even worse kind of conflict between Belarusian people and Ukrainian people than with Russia. Much worse in terms of broken family ties and just kind of personal tragic angle on this conflict. We hope it will not happen. Obviously, Belarusian army doesn't have enough manpower or technological power to defeat Ukrainian army, even on this limited part of the front. But it will obviously be a very bad move because it will deter our forces from other directions and just increase human suffering and number of victims and everything. So we pray and hope it doesn't happen. Then there are all these threats to neighboring countries by Russian spokesmen, by Russian diplomats, and especially this kind of media stars, so to speak, this propagandists really, who work for Russian TV, and usually they speak things that are not yet allowed to be spoken by diplomats or politicians. So they are like spokesmen of the worst militaristic kind, and they have already started openly threatening Poland, Slovakia, Baltic countries, and basically everyone else. There were mentions of Canada, mentions of the US, obviously not invading North American countries, but hitting their convoys if they are here, or attacking troops in outside Ukraine, on the territory of European countries, and so on. So this hysteria is becoming more and more pumped up in the Russian media and Russian society. And one of the most disturbing signs we saw yesterday was white smoke over the embassy, Russian embassy in Warsaw, which means they are burning documents and preparing for evacuation. Exactly the same thing happened in Ukraine several days before the war started. We pray and hope it's not the case with Poland, but who knows what this maniac can do. It's obvious that he can do now everything, and there are obviously threats of serious threats of using weapons of mass destruction, not only nuclear but chemical, biological weapons, and we all know that it seems from his behavior Putin has no more limits to what he can do. And it's doubtful if we can rely also on the common sense of his generals who will be implementing this, because it seems again they have no limits, no brakes, as we say. The speed of this war machine is so high, the hysteria is so high in Russian society and political elites that anything can happen. Next, I want to throw an eye on what's happening on the war theater very briefly. These are numbers. I think they speak for themselves, although it's in Ukrainian, but you have images there. How many planes, military jets, helicopters, tanks, armored vehicles were destroyed over this 3+ weeks of war. So big numbers in white show general numbers, and the small yellow numbers with pluses show the increase over the last 24 hours. I think it's pretty informative, so I wanted to put it here. And in terms of live power, Russians seem to have lost over 15,000 soldiers. And just yesterday the number hit the mark of the total losses of Russian Soviet army in Afghanistan in 10 years. So in 3 weeks of this war, Russian army has lost just as many soldiers as in 10 years of the fight in Afghanistan. It's staggering number and statistic. There are more and more news and kind of informational wave in Russian media about the soldiers that are brought back dead and buried in Russia. Ukrainian journalists follow this very closely and pick up images from various Russian internet media newspapers, and there are literally thousands of funerals held in Russia these days in various far remote villages as far as Sakhalin and Vladivostok and deep Siberian regions. Young guys who are 18, 21 years old returned back home in coffins, fighting in the war in the country they probably would not be able to show on the map, and they had no deal with. So this is really tragic for Russian army. It's not that we very much sympathize with them. we do what we have to do in the war. We protect our country, but we hope that this will at some point detonate in the form of protests in Russia or something else that would contribute to stopping of this war. Some victims are just incredible. Like yesterday I read a report, a veritable report, it was thoroughly documented, that something like 80% of personnel of some units is missing, so they are dead or taken captives by Ukrainian side. And especially interesting that some Marines and special forces that had not incurred any losses over the last 25 years, not even during the war in Chechnya, they lost one single man, but like in one day they lost like 600 fighters in Ukraine because of artillery shellings and this Bayraktar hits and other things. In one case, it was all the leading personnel of a very elite special force that was killed in just in one day, and it's hugely demoralizing. I'm speaking about that not because I want to smack this, to rejoice in those deaths, but because we hope that this will eventually break the spine, the backbone of Russian army, because these losses are terrible and they are being told not so much in the media. Media in Russia are very discreet about this. They publish some pictures, as you can see from this slide, but they don't go into detail, and they certainly do not report the objective number of losses, because that would be quite explosive for the public opinion. Not that public opinion in Russia really matters, but still there would be a lot of resentment and people would be at least afraid and questioning what is happening there in this war. Russian media are still triumphantly reporting that Russian army is advancing, Kiev is encircled, the military defeat of Ukrainian army is imminent, but actually this is complete rubbish. What is happening on the ground is quite the opposite. Ukrainian army is holding the ground fast, and there is no hope for Russians to make any major breakthrough, although they are still pressing from all sides. But military speaking, as all the experts, foreign and Ukrainian, agree, there is no hope to make any considerable advance with the number of troops Russians have at their disposal or can possibly deploy in the closest weeks. Now to the problem of humanitarian catastrophe that is evolving in Ukraine. This picture is eloquent for those of you who know some pictures from Russia. You will recognize the allusion, the visual allusion to the church of Saint Basil at the Red Square. Unfortunately, this transformation of Russian culture, Russian ecclesial life into this militaristic absurdity is reflected in this picture that is speaking for itself. More and more we see in Ukraine the implementation of these tactics that were used by Russian forces throughout history, but the most recent ones would be in Grozny in Chechnya and then in Aleppo in Syria, where they cannot fight on the ground and cannot achieve their objectives in fighting, in battle. They start to channel their anger on civil population, on peaceful cities, and destroy them to the ground. Here you have the pictures of Grozny, you have picture of Syria, and unfortunately maybe not yet at that scale, and I pray it never gets to the same scale, but we have the same tendency developing in Ukraine. Actually some towns and even some bigger cities are wiped out. Basically 80% of buildings are destroyed. And you all know about the city of Mariupol, which is the largest and most tragic case, but there were some other, especially in Donbas region, that became the immediate target of aggression from the first days of the war. And those cities basically don't exist any longer. They were smaller, but still people lived there, and a lot of civilians died in the shellings. Here is a map just to visualize how many civilian buildings were destroyed in each region of Ukraine. As you can see, most of Ukraine is covered now by this terrible tragedy. The map shows the number of residential buildings, medical facilities, educational facilities, and cultural objects that have been destroyed in various regions. As you can see in the center, there is one region that is not affected so far, thanks God. It's Poltava region. Just for various tactical reasons, the fighting is not so intense there, and Western Ukraine is so far rather safe in terms of general destruction of civilian infrastructure. Of course, we had hits of military infrastructure, but not as bad as in other parts of Ukraine. Here is something I wanted to show you. It's really heartbreaking, and it gives you a taste of what people go through. It's a little note that was recovered by someone who fled from Mariupol through a humanitarian corridor, and it says it's just a note from one person who was trapped in Mariupol to the son of a woman who died in Mariupol but who is not in Mariupol. So it's addressed to certain Dmitry, and the text goes, "Your mother has died. The death was quick. She died 9th of March in this concrete location, and the best I could do for her to bury her here." And then there is a drawing, as you can see in the bottom of this note, a place next to a kindergarten, as it says, in a corner next to a fence of a kindergarten. The mother is buried there. So after the war, hopefully the son can come and exhumate the body of his mother, to bury it with dignity. So, but this is just like what people are jotting down to pass the news to their relatives who will survive and possibly come back to that location after the war. Here is the war criminal, certain General Colonel Mikhail Mizintsev, who is reportedly the butcher of Mariupol, who is the head of the military operation, who personally gave orders to bomb the theater with children, art school with refugees hiding in the basement, and generally who is wiping out the city of Mariupol, not allowing the citizens out of the city through humanitarian corridors. Only very small portion of people could actually use these green corridors, which are still very dangerous. 2 days ago, there was a green corridor and buses with children, and they shot those buses with machine guns, and number of children were wounded, some of them critically wounded. So this is just not so often this kind of war crimes have concrete face, but in this case we know who is behind it. Our special forces know about that, and this man was also someone behind the shellings of Aleppo in Syria. He was the commander-in-chief of the operation in Syria, who is also responsible there for many civilian deaths. We can only hope that at some point he will be brought to justice, like Eichmann in Jerusalem some time ago. Here is another picture, just very graphic, I would say, of a man in Kyiv, actually, who returned to the destroyed building, apartment building. You can see the wall is completely missing, and he's trying to pick up some things in his apartment just to rescue some of his belongings, because now he has no shelter, he has no money, probably nothing, just trying to pick up some valuables from his former apartment. Yeah, it's a video, but there were some heavy shellings in the capital, in Kyiv. A big shopping plaza was destroyed 2 days ago by a rocket hit. You can see how it was before the war and what's these rubbles that are today. I took this picture just to illustrate that the campaign of denazification of Ukraine led by Russia is also destroying the very memorials to the soldiers of World War II who actually fought Nazis. So it's paradoxical. Even more paradoxical is and tragic that some people who survived World War II and who were direct victims of Nazis at that time are still dying in this war. I showed you before in some of my earlier presentations this video of Holocaust survivors from the underground system in Kyiv who were singing Ukrainian anthem and with Israeli flag and saying that as Holocaust survivors they don't want to be freed from Nazis because there are no Nazis in Ukraine, there is no danger to them. Yesterday this man who was 97 years old and who was the survivor of Buchenwald, a death camp, a Nazi death camp, and he was actually like the oldest surviving, the last surviving prisoner in Ukraine, and he was the head of some kind of organization of victims of Nazi concentration camps, and he was killed yesterday or the day before yesterday in Kharkiv by Russian rocket or something. So it's quite symbolic death, I would say. And it brings us to a topic I want to raise in my following video. I will be recording next days about the presence of Nazis in Ukraine. Some people keep asking me like, but what about real Nazis? Isn't there this Azov battalion, for example? Aren't they Nazis? Don't they use Nazi symbols and all of that? The short answer to that is no. But since people keep asking me about that, and it's a kind of hot topic in the Western media, I will dedicate one of my next videos to this topic of Nazism in Ukraine. And still another video I want to record on the role of art in this conflict, the role of humor and the role of art, because we have many kind of funny images, although the situation is far from funny, but people somehow channel their anxiety into laughter as it happens, and there are many caricatures and memes and all that which I don't think they make their way into the Western media, so I want to show some of them to you and comment on them. Another thing that is also very vividly developing in Ukraine these days is various works of art that relate to the war, to the reality of war and suffering. One I just stumbled across yesterday and I asked the permission to use in my presentation is done by a friend of mine, Uliana Krychovets, who is an iconographer and artist here from Lviv. She works in the Ukrainian Catholic University, and she has just drawn this kind of Easter postcard. Ukrainians are waiting for Easter. that I think beautifully brings together the idea of suffering, the idea of the protection, divine protection that we are experiencing, and the idea of the hope for the Easter, for resurrection. Thank you for watching. Please keep us in your prayers, keep supporting Ukraine in every way you can. Please, if you can, support us by your donations. We keep buying things for the army, for the refugees, for people suffering, usually blood stopping medicine, but also some other critically needed supplies. People who are watching this video over this 3 weeks have donated a rather essential amount of money, which I passed to the Help to the Frontlines initiative I'm working with, and every penny of this sum went to direct relief of people in need and help to hold the lines of our defense against the aggression. So please continue supporting us, and we are holding this front not only for Ukraine but for Europe and for the whole civilized world, and we hope that this madness ends in our victory rather sooner than later. Thank you very much.